Dun dun da 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 dun dun. Dun dun da 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 dun dun. That's right, folks. Pardon my beautiful title music for today. Today we are talking about the epic saga, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin, oftentimes known and referred to as A Game of Thrones, which is the title of the first book in the series. This one is going to be fun. If you're interested, then stay tuned and enjoy the show. All right, my friends, as I said, today we're going to be talking about one of the most epic fantasy fiction stories ever told, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. There's a lot to unpack here, but first and foremost, we need to deal with a little bit of housekeeping as always. Astute listeners of the show will have realized that it's been a little while since my last upload. I am working on a way to standardize these episodes to make them more regular and useful to you, and something that I can do more reliably and get them out in a more consistent basis. I'm getting some great recommendations for books, and I want to be able to get to all of them, but I simply can't. I've sort of given up on the idea that I'm going to be able to review every great book that I read. This past week, I cataloged my entire backlog of books that I want to do a podcast episode on, and I have a staggering 125 of them, and that list is growing all the time. The process of selection for the show is always a tough one for me. I end up writing part of an episode and then getting distracted by another book, and on it goes. I scrap it, I start over, and it's just not a healthy production schedule. There are just so many great books to choose from, and combined with your excellent recommendations, I'm just not able to get to them all in the way that I'd like to. So in order to try to alleviate the bottleneck in my production schedule somewhat, I've decided that I'm just going to put all of the books into an Excel sheet, and I'm going to do a random number drawing to determine which of them is going to be featured on the next episode. That's how I picked this episode, and that's how I'm going to pick the next one. In fact, I'm going to pick the next one right now. So, spin the wheel. And on the next episode of What's Tom Reading, I'm going to be reviewing... Oh, that's a good one. We're going to be talking about Hard Times by Charles Dickens. I'll make a note of that here, and I can start prep as soon as I'm done with this recording. So there you go. You see, I'm already liking this process because I wouldn't have picked either of these next two episodes, either this one or the next one, but they're both excellent and will make awesome shows. I'm optimistic that this will be a better way for me to run this puppy. Time will tell. I'm also, upon reviewing your feedback, sticking to a more semi-scripted approach to the show where I write down most of what I want to talk about beforehand, so the whole thing doesn't end up being all rambly and off-topic. That seems to be the sort of dominant opinion among you, my lovely listeners. And as always, I want to thank all of you for listening. If you need to get in touch with me with any comments, complaints, criticisms, compliments, corrections, or anything else of the sort, I can be reached at whatstomreading@gmail.com. If you write to me, I will get back to you. That's my commitment to you guys, and I'm going to stick to it as long as I can. If you enjoy the show and feel like sharing it with a friend or family member who you think would get a kick out of it, that would be greatly appreciated. That's how the show has been growing so far, and we are in over a dozen different countries pretty regularly, which is just crazy to me. So thank you all so much. I see you and I appreciate you. And without further ado, let's get into the show. Here's a quote. "The gods made the earth for all men to share. Only when the kings come with their crowns and steel swords, they claimed it was all theirs. My trees, they said, you can't eat them apples. My stream, you can't fish there. My wood, you're not to hunt. My earth, my water, my castle, my daughter, keep your hands away or I'll chop 'em off. But maybe if you kneel to me, I'll let you have a sniff. You call us thieves, but at least a thief has to be brave and clever and quick. A kneeler only has to kneel." There's a quote from A Game of Thrones. A Song of Ice and Fire is the name of the broader series. A Game of Thrones is the name of the first book. Gosh, this is just an epic fantasy fiction series. So let's get this out of the way up front. A Song of Ice and Fire is not just dragons and daggers. It's not just feasts and fights. And it's definitely not just Game of Thrones, the TV show. Heaven forbid. I'm one of those people who watched the show as a younger, less scrupulous man, and now cannot fully recommend it to others. The first season is typical HBO smut with gratuitous nudity inserted in pointless places, random sex scenes, totally exploitative, totally pointless. It's everything wrong with cable TV back in those days, all rolled up into one. Gratuitous violence, gratuitous sex, just a pointless activity used to, used back in the days when people, for some reason, wanted to watch porn in their living room. I don't know, I don't recommend watching pornography anywhere, but I never really understood the compulsion that some people had to watch softcore pornography in their living room with their family members. I just never really got that. But hey, different strokes for different folks, I guess. After a little while, they seem to have realized that they had an actual masterpiece on their hands. So they sort of stopped with the random softcore porn and focused up on production. And those were the golden days of Game of Thrones, where they almost couldn't miss. I mean, the cast and the characters, the sets, the productions, even the writing was just top notch. It's as good a TV show as was ever made. But then they ran into a massive problem. You see, Big George hasn't actually finished the books. Spoiler alert right there. We'll get to that a little bit later. So once the showrunners found themselves out on their own without the source material to work from, the show immediately turned into a complete dumpster fire. In fact, season 8 of the show is without question one of the most universally panned and despised conclusions to a TV show in history. It was so bad that my own personal theory is that George Martin is letting the flames die down before he actually finishes the books. And if I were a cynical man, I'd say that the show got a little tip from him on how the story was going to end. And then when he saw that it was a complete disaster and all the fans hated it entirely, he decided that, gosh, I better not do that. And now he isn't so sure where to go from here. That's my sort of pet theory. Everyone has a pet theory for why this man, after 14 years, still hasn't finished these books. It's been 14 years since the last one that he wrote. It's been decades since he started the series. So, but criticisms of the show aside, we are talking about the books. They aren't exactly PG either. In fact, for more sensitive readers, I can't even recommend reading them. I wouldn't let your kids read these. There were times where like the sex, the violence, language, cruelty, all that stuff, that was more than I could comfortably stomach. So reader be warned on that one. But what George R.R. Martin has built in his sprawling, bloody, political, and philosophical masterpiece is, in fact, literature, like with a capital L, sort of masquerading as fantasy. We're talking like Machiavelli with magic. We're talking Shakespeare with spears and dragons. We're talking Lord of the Rings with incest and anti-heroes. It's, if you're into that sort of thing. It's epic in scope and scale, and his skill in weaving together a tapestry of different characters into this cohesive narrative in like a believable, even enchanting world is essentially unparalleled. Sure, there are some missteps along the way, of course, but by and large, this will go down in history as one of the great fantasy series ever written. That is, if he ever gets around to finishing it. But before we dive headlong into the Seven Kingdoms, let's get something straight. This is not going to be a spoiler-ridden synopsis. As you know, longtime listeners of the show, I don't want to ruin the story for you. I want to talk about it. I want to give you a little bit of a taste, a little bit of a teaser, a little bit of like some cool things that contain in this book that will help to kind of prime you to picking it up or not picking it up. For this one, I'm going to spoil it a little bit here, my own review, by saying that like I just don't think I can really recommend this series. And there's a couple of reasons why, and we'll get to them. But this is one of those series that is so ubiquitous, so popular, so in the zeitgeist of our shared culture now that I just can't really see a good reason to exclude it from a podcast on great books, right? Like there are just some books that whether you like them or not, whether you would recommend them or not, whether you would let your kids read them or not, you just have to admit that they have had a serious impact on the culture. And this is one of those situations that we're in where A Song of Ice and Fire is maybe the epic fantasy of our times. If you take Harry Potter off the table, which, J.K. Rowling, she's not fond of being included in the in the category of epic fantasy. She doesn't seem to really like the fat nerds with whom she would associate if she were to to be lumped into that group. Harry Potter is sort of more like a contemporary fantasy. It's a little bit more young adult. I can see her argument for having it be slightly. It's like a soft magic system. It's not really, it's not really hardcore fantasy. This is maybe the epic fantasy of our time, A Song of Ice and Fire. And it's for that reason, that's why I'm going to be talking about it today. But like I said, it's not going to be spoilers. It's not going to be a recommendation, but it's just going to be kind of talking about the big themes, the big impact, the big characters, like the things that you're going to hear about if you're just like a human walking around. This book will touch your life at some point because it's so out there. It's so well known. It's so well watched. The TV show, the books are so well read that eventually, if you're in the book reading world, this is going to end up on your radar at some point. So I want to talk about it. But no spoilers. If you have read the books, you'll find hopefully some fresh insights here. And if you haven't, I won't ruin it for you. That's the deal. This is a spoiler light zone. So no red weddings or no details about the red weddings, except for to say the red wedding. Maybe I shouldn't even have said that. Gosh. We're just going with a map, a sword, and some good questions. So let's start here. Why does Westeros, the world that Game of Thrones is set in, or the continent, Essos is the other one across the sea to the east, Westeros to the west. It's really great. Why does this world feel so real? And that's because George R.R. Martin follows one simple rule. He says, in real life, the hardest thing to do is to tell what's right. And even when you do know it, it's still hard to do it. And that's what makes this series powerful. It's a world where morality matters, and it sometimes costs you dearly. He doesn't write fantasy about good versus evil, which, I like fantasy that's about good versus evil. Martin instead, he writes it like it's about people versus themselves. And in many instances, it's two evil people facing off against each other while the innocent stand by basically helpless to intervene. There are these titanic forces at play grinding up against each other, and all the little people are often just like crushed in the mix. And you add to that the ticking time bomb that will destroy the world, and you end up in a situation where you are cheering for someone's petty victories, but also biting your nails at how little such victories will matter at the end of the day if humanity doesn't get itself sorted out and face the threat from beyond the wall. Martin's real invention in this story isn't so much the magic or the dragons, it's the complex characters and the moral complexity and like these painfully human characters that he's created. Every single one of them is perfectly believable and complex. I've never ever encountered such a rich and believable cast of characters in a story as I have in this one in my life. This is without a doubt the most rich, complex, immersive world of literary fiction that I've ever experienced. And so for all of my detractions about the series, for all of my reasons why you shouldn't read it, I do actually think that this is high art. And so I find myself a little bit conflicted here because this is it's executed with stunning skill. And just take this line from A Storm of Swords, right? The world is overflowing with horrible things, but they're all a tray of cakes compared to the evil inside people's heads. Just kind of an interesting thought there that, gosh, that's the ethos, right? There's no perfect heroes in the story. There's no pure villains. It's just flawed, fascinating people doing their best or their worst, right? In a world that doesn't seem to care much who wins or loses, who lives or dies. It's this mixture of pointless cruelty and madness with like a love and hope and nobility that makes the whole story so viscerally, painfully readable and real and relatable. It's gut-wrenching the whole time. Like you feel like you just can't take your eyes off of it. It's kind of tearing at your heart as you're reading. That's why I think it's high fiction. It's high art. And the world building, oh my gosh, it's not just good. It's precise. It's forensic. Martin has said that Tolkien has inspired him, but he wanted to go like a little bit deeper. He wanted to go to like the next level, which is hard because Tolkien was a famously fastidious writer. But he was asking questions like, what's Aragorn's tax policy, right? That might sound silly, but it's actually kind of central to making the world feel like a real world. And in Martin's world, tax policy has consequences. Wars cost money, right? Crowns weigh heavy. And when winter comes, it's not just a seasonal metaphor. It's a food storage crisis and a migration issue and a theological debate all rolled up into one thing. You feel this machinery of Westeros just grinding away with every political decision, every bad harvest, every failed alliance. And as the story progresses, the people go from relative peace and harmony to being more brutish, hostile, desperate, dirty, and altogether nasty. In Lord of the Rings, the best books ever written, in my opinion, the best fantasy story, certainly. The elves never really change much. Even the humans, who are supposed to be like these temperamental and ever-changing entities in Middle Earth, they still fit fairly neatly into their boxes, right? Rohan are the horse warriors. Gondor are the infantry. The individual men and women aren't even really at the level of side characters, right? The farmers and the peasants and the individual soldiers. Yet in A Song of Ice and Fire, the very landscape is like this changing, evolving character that moves along with the story. You get sort of a feeling that you're experiencing the decay of a great civilization in real time. And so when you flick from a scene at a farm where there's nothing to eat and the citizens are getting desperate to like this opulent palace where the current occupant of the Iron Throne is plotting and planning, you get just this really, really strong sense of whiplash and you get a better sense of the stakes. It all, like I said, it all just feels so real. That's the main thing that I could say about this book is that as you're reading it, it feels real. It feels historical. It feels clinical. There's something about it that's just so relatable and realistic, and it feels like a documentary almost, right? And then there's this concept of time in a story, right? Martin, he doesn't just tell a story, he buries you in layer after layer of history. He writes he writes a very detailed present, but it's also haunted by a very detailed past. You feel like the ghost of the Targaryens, the erstwhile ruling royal family, who's been almost extinguished by the time of the events of the beginning of the book. You feel like this ghost of this former royal family just wandering in the landscape. You feel it's a kingdom that is it still kind of misses what it once was. The people still know, they still remember what they once were, but they have hope for what they may yet become. And they've sort of, we're in the events of the first king. At the start of the book, the man sitting on the Iron Throne is King Robert, and he fought Robert's Rebellion, and he's the first king of a new dynasty. And so the people have this kind of like cautious hope, but they also have, some of them have like a yearning for the past, and some of them have some fear of the future, and some of them are plotting. They question the new king's legitimacy, and like it has this it's such a beautiful place to start a story because it's just rich with tension, and you just feel it. It's everywhere. There's still loyalists to the Targaryens. There's still split loyalties. There's still people who, people still talk about the battles that they fought in the rebellion. It's just you are engaged in this history of this place that is so complete that you feel like you've just almost been born into a world, and you're rushing to catch up, and you're picking up context clues, and you're figuring out how everyone feels about this history, and you're learning almost like a child growing up in Westeros about what people think about the Targaryens and what people think about Robert Baratheon, and like it's just intriguing. It sort of captures that impulse that you have when you move to a new place, and I feel this because we've just moved to Scotland. This impulse to think like, okay, who's in charge here? What are the main things here? Where do you go to eat? What are the foods that you eat? What are the culturally significant things here? Tell me about your history. Tell me about this rebellion. Tell me about that king. Tell me about, you just have this almost childlike hunger to understand what's going on so that you can use that information in your day-to-day life. You feel like you're at a disadvantage when other people know it. And as soon as you start living in the fantasy world of Westeros, you have this like desperate need to figure out what's going on, and so you start digging into someone gives a little veiled comment about the Targaryens, and you're like, is that person hiding something? Are they saying what they really feel? It doesn't feel like exposition. It's suspect, and it's really, really complex and rich and beautiful, and you just feel like it's crazy. It's crazy. Like you still feel the long shadow of Robert's Rebellion and every broken family and bitter grudge. And let's see, he quotes, "Men live their lives trapped in an eternal present. They forget the lessons of the past. History is a wheel, and it turns." And you really feel that turning. You really, really feel like you're part of a real historical moment, and a delicate one. And it proves to be fragile enough that, as the title implies, so it's not too much of a spoiler, Robert Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals and the First Men. I think that's his full title. I'm not positive about that. Like I said, there's a lot of lore. It's deep. It's rich. And that's just from memory, by the way. It's been a little while since I've read these, but that's how good they are. They stick deep in your brain. And just in refreshing my memory as I was preparing for this podcast, there's just so much there. It's so rich, so beautiful. It's a truly a deep and dense story world. But as you can tell by the title, Robert Baratheon doesn't stay on the Iron Throne for long. And that kicks off a succession crisis, which is something that, my wife and I were talking about the other day. She's reading a book about real English kings and the succession crises that have happened here, that have shaped history. And it's real. It is so real that it's real, right? And so, the fact that this book so beautifully captures what it means for a kingdom to fall into a succession crisis, and the civil wars and the feuding lords and the shifting alliances. It's just chef's kiss. Like, mwah, it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's a perfect piece of art. Really. Like I said, I have a lot of problems with this book. And so like, I can't give it a wholehearted recommendation. I can't even give it a half-hearted recommendation. But it's sort of one of those things where, like, gosh dang it, it is good art. Like it is good art. It's not meant to make you feel comfortable, right? It's meant to make you think, and it is dense. It's gorgeous and gritty and cruel, but it's always it's deliberate. It feels like it's done on purpose. You feel like the writer is in control. He's not just a passive observer. And so while you're flying by the seat of your pants, you have this feeling that you're being guided skillfully through this tumultuous landscape. And that's a really, really awesome feeling as a reader. Just being able to like, okay, I trust the author. I trust that he's going to pull this off. And he does time and time and time again. He's just one of the all-time great authors of all time. And so here are just a few of the big questions that Martin invites us to. What makes a good leader? Justice or mercy? Or neither? Can loyalty survive ambition? Should it? Is prophecy a gift or a trap? And the biggest one, is it better to be honorable or alive? These are questions that matter in our world just as much as they do in Westeros. So we're going to explore now a few of the major characters that sort of carry these questions like shields or bury them like deep secrets. From the bastard in the snow to the queen with fire in her blood, Martin gives us this rogues gallery of souls that somehow feel more real than most of the people on your LinkedIn feed. The tagline of the whole epic saga is the following line delivered by one of the claimants to the Iron Throne. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. But also, when you read A Song of Ice and Fire, you think, right? You don't just live or die. That's lame. Sorry, that's cheesy. I'm not going to cut it out. I want you to see that sometimes I write cheesy things that they look a lot better written than they do when I say them. Like I said, it's a work in progress. Okay, you guys wanted the more scripted things. You're just going to have to deal with a little bit of cringe every once in a while. Okay, just deal with it, and I'll work on it. So as I said, A Song of Ice and Fire, it doesn't just give you this sprawling world. It gives you characters who feel like you might bump into them on the street or see them on TV running for political office or something like that. They're the kind of people who you could invite over for dinner and maybe they'd poison you or lecture you on feudal tax burdens or recite poetry or cry or challenge you to a duel or any and all of the above. They're just complex, real seeming people. And Martin's great genius isn't just in the complexity of his setting, which by the way is ruthlessly complex. The geography, as world building goes, it's second to none, but it's also in his ability to make you feel sympathy and revulsion for the same character, sometimes in the same paragraph. These are not your stock fantasy archetypes. No one is just the hero. No one is just the villain. And I say that as a person who, by the way, really admires writings that involves iconic characters and archetypes. I like a super evil villain. I like a super good hero. I like Aragorn. I like Sauron. I like them as literary types. I think that they're fantastic. In fact, I think one thing that perhaps holds A Song of Ice and Fire back from being a true epic that will last for centuries is the fact that there isn't a single aspirational character in the whole mix. There's not one person who I would want to be like or who I'd want my children to grow up to be like. They're all, frankly, horrible. And yet you find yourself rooting for one or the other. And sometimes you find yourself changing sides and changing loyalties just like they do. It feels a little bit like a mixture between epic fantasy and high art and one of those like trashy reality TV shows like The Bachelor or something like that, where you know that you shouldn't care. You know that you shouldn't watch. You know that it's garbage. The people involved are all just the worst, and yet you can't take your eyes off of it. It's like this beautiful train wreck. But they're all great characters. I don't know. I'm conflicted. Can you tell? Can you tell that I'm conflicted? Maybe that's why I knew I had to do an episode on this series. There are a few books that have made me think as much as this one does, and there are the few situations where I read something and I'm just like, oh man, I just don't know how I feel about it. It was so good. It was so epic. It was so great, and yet it's filthy. It's bad. It's not something that I would want to expose to my children. It's not something that I think maybe even I should have been exposed to, but there's something so raw and visceral and about it that makes it feel almost important. It's like reading some like nasty story or going on a tour of the Tower of London or something like that. And you see like, this is where they tortured them. And this is how they did it. And you're like, ew, nasty. Oh, that's horrible. And like, it makes your heart feel gross and makes your head feel heavy, but you just can't take your eyes off of it. And you feel like you're witnessing something that is important somehow. It's important somehow that someone knows about it. That this knowledge is being transferred from person to person. And so you take the knowledge and you bear it almost like a weight, almost like a stain on you, but that it feels like it's important. And there's something about A Song of Ice and Fire that it's just that way, where it feels like it says something about human beings, about our souls, that it's filthy, it's nasty, it's selfish, it's grasping, it's cruel, and you don't feel good about it, and you're rooting for people and you don't feel good that you're rooting for them, and it especially doesn't feel good when they do something horrible and hideous and you go, man, maybe I would have done the same thing in that situation, right? It's sort of this dark mirror into your own soul, and it's one of those things where like, gosh, I don't want my children to read this book, but at the same time, I do want them to have that experience, but maybe when they're older, when they're more able to understand it more, like I said, I'm totally conflicted about this book, totally conflicted about it. Um, and I think that's beautiful in its own way, right? If we can get a little bit meta here, that's why I really like this book. That's why I'm talking to you about it today on this podcast, is because I can't give a ringing endorsement on this book, and yet I know that it's important enough that it deserves me talking about it. They're great characters. There are a few books that have made me think like this. So let's talk about the character spectrum and what Martin does so brilliantly to interrogate not just morality but identity. So you have Jon Snow. Let's begin with the bastard in the snow. He's named Jon Snow because Snow is the name that all bastards of the North get as their last name. He is the bastard son of Ned Stark, who is one of the main characters. He's Robert Baratheon's longtime best friend, and he's played by Sean Bean. So that should tell you a little bit about his longevity in the show and in the books. He doesn't last, unfortunately. He's probably the only character that I can unreservedly say was a good man, and that's as far as it goes. Unfortunately, being a good man in A Song of Ice and Fire doesn't take you very far. In fact, it doesn't even take you to the end of the first book. That's the only spoiler that I'm going to give for the entire series. That's because it is ubiquitous, common knowledge that Ned Stark dies pretty early on in the Game of Thrones. It's still worth reading. There's no spoilers on how he dies or who swings the sword or why. That's definitely worth knowing. But it's already, I think if you don't know that happens, you've probably been living under. So I broke my own spoiler rule immediately, but I'm going to go back into the cone of silence here. I promise you I'm not going to give away any more plot relevant information. But the reason I say that is because Jon, because of that, Jon being Ned's bastard, he ends up being sort of banished. He ends up being banished to the Wall, and he's in this cult of night watchmen whose job it is to defend the Wall from an unknown terror on the other side. And it's sort of a punishment for thieves and vagabonds and bastards and dishonorable men. It's a good way for them to deal with the trash of the kingdom without executing them or putting them in prison and having to feed them for the rest of their life. Kind of an interesting system. Jon he's this perfect encapsulation of Martin's favorite struggle, which is idealism versus pragmatism. What's the right thing versus what is the thing that you should do in order to win, right? And he's raised on stories of virtue, loyalty, sacrifice, and nobility. He's every inch his father's son. And then he's sort of dumped into a world that chews up those values like gristle, to be honest. But unlike the heroes of traditional fantasy, Jon doesn't win because of his honor. He suffers because of it. And Martin makes you ask, is it noble to be noble if it kills you and dooms everyone around you? Or is honor just vanity by another name? It's sort of an interesting question. I'm not really compelled by it. I tend to think that Jon is at his best when he's behaving morally. But there's a reason other characters keep warning each other. When dead men come hunting in the night, do you think it matters who sits on the Iron Throne? You begin to wonder, is it better to keep your soul clean or your people alive? And that's just one of Jon's big struggles as he navigates the political complexity of being a bastard son of one of the most important men in Westeros. And as the story progresses, the plot thickens for old Johnny Boy in ways that are delicious and put his honor to the test. He's my favorite character in the series by far. And he's the only one who I'd ever even maybe slightly sort of kind of consider wanting to be like. And that says a lot because his life is pretty stinking bad. Let's move on. Tyrion Lannister, the most famous dwarf in Westeros. Tyrion is the ultimate contradiction. He's a man born into power, yet at the same time cast aside by it. He's clever, charming, and profoundly lonely. He's smart and educating, but he's also a whoremonger with a serious wine problem. And he is, as I said before, a dwarf, which his father is very ashamed of. He gets treated very cruelly for his dwarfism, which is is very sad for him. I love this description that we get of Tyrion sort of standing next to his brother Jaime. And this is from Jon Snow's perspective right at the beginning of the series. So if you pick up this book, this will be maybe like the 5th or 6th page that you read. And it says, he, Jon, was more interested in the pair that came behind him, the king, the queen's brothers, the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, the lion and the imp. There was no mistaking which was which. Sir Jaime Lannister was twin to Queen Cersei, tall and golden, with flashing green eyes and a smile that cut like a knife. He wore crimson silk, high black boots, a black satin cloak. On the breast of his tunic, the lion of his house was embroidered in gold thread, roaring its defiance. They called him the Lion of Lannister to his face and whispered Kingslayer behind his back. Jon found it hard to look away from him. This is what a king should look like, he thought to himself as the man passed. Then he saw the other one, waddling along, half hidden by his brother's side. Tyrion Lannister, the youngest of Lord Tywin's brood and by far the ugliest. All that the gods had given to Cersei and Jaime, they had denied Tyrion. He was a dwarf, half his brother's height, struggling to keep pace on stunted legs. His head was too large for his body, with a brute squashed-in face beneath a swollen shelf of a brow. One green eye and one black one peered out from under a lank fall of hair, so blonde it seemed white. John watched him with fascination. Isn't that just fantastic writing? I am green with envy whenever I read a passage like that, written by a master craftsman. What I wouldn't give to be able to write such things. Oh man, one of Tyrion's great quotes in the series is, "I have a tender spot in my heart for cripples and bastards and broken things." And that's not just self-pity, by the way. That's the core of his moral worldview. He's one of the few characters who sees people clearly because he's been ignored, laughed at, and underestimated his whole life. And what does he do with that clarity? Well, sometimes he uses it for good and sometimes for evil. Sometimes he helps and sometimes he devotes himself to mischief and manipulation. Mostly, he drinks and he spends his father's enormous fortune on prostitutes. But sometimes he bleeds for a good cause. He saves at least as many lives as he ruins. And Tyrion is this classic mind over might character, and one that does perhaps the most growing, no pun intended, right, of any of the characters in the series. And Tyrion, he embodies one of the series' key tensions. Intelligence can win battles, but it doesn't always win peace, and it certainly doesn't guarantee happiness. All right, Daenerys Targaryen. Daenerys, the mother of dragons, the breaker of chains, the reformer queen with a fiery temper. She is the last surviving member of the Targaryen line after Robert's rebellion wiped her family out. She is banished to a far-off land and is doing her best to consolidate power to make a play for the throne that should have belonged to her family. So what Martin does with Daenerys is fascinating because he makes her both like this messiah character and monarch at different parts of the story, and then immediately shows you that she isn't really ready or worthy to be either. She has this good heart and wants to save and serve her people, but the ruthlessness with which she treats her enemies, well, that's all well and good when you're at war, but what happens when her family's plague of madness starts to bubble to the surface and she starts to see enemies around every corner? As one character says, madness and greatness are two sides of the same coin. When a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin and the world holds its breath. that about sums it up, right? Daenerys, she has vision, she has compassion, she also has power. And power in Martin's universe is never clean. The more she tries to save the world, the more the world resists her. And that brings us back to the question, is it better to be loved or feared? For Dany, the line between justice and vengeance is always whisper thin, and her dragons, well, let's just say they're not known for subtle diplomacy, more like a fire and chewing people up kind of. So that's Daenerys Targaryen. Sandor Clegane, he's another character that really jumps out at me. He's a fan favorite. Sandor, the Hound Clegane. He's just one of those characters that should be like a flat out brute. He's a killer. He's a thug. He hates knights. He hates singing. He hates children. He hates fire. He hates everything, really. Like he's just in the show, he's one of the main reasons why I wouldn't recommend the show to children or even like honorable people, really, because his language is so foul. It's some of the worst language that I've ever heard on television. And it's like it's bad enough that I'm cringing as he's talking. But Martin, despite all of his rough, and he is rough, he's scarred. He's a scarred, hideous, foul-mouthed, stinking, putrid, murderous, bad dude. But Martin, he peels the man like an onion, a flaming, rotten, foul-mouthed, filthy, murderer onion. And Sandor Clegane is what happens when you try to live without illusions, right? You're Mr. Tough Guy. You see through the lies, right? But you can't quite escape needing things, right? It's like he says things like, there are no true knights. And yet he finds himself watching over the weak. He despises nobility, yet he himself keeps on rescuing children. He's trying not to care, and he keeps failing at it over and over again. He's a great commentary on cynicism, right? Where you can build a wall around your soul, but something always gets in. And the cynic, cynicism is fine insofar as it goes, but you're not going to last forever as a cynic. Eventually, you're going to have to admit that you're human and that you love. We all love. We all got that. So, I know there are some people. It's not very common in this day and age. Most people are kind of the opposite extreme, but there are still some people out there who are like true blue cynics who try to be detached from everything and not get their jimmies rustled by anything and not get invested in anything, and they don't want to believe in a cause or a country or a flag, and they just say, nothing matters, and I see through the lies of the Jedi and like all that crap. you got to live for something, man. Everyone's got to serve someone. Everyone's got to live for something. And it's just a matter of choosing what, and hopefully choosing something that is good for you and for the people that you love. I have some recommendations about that if you ever want to start an email dialogue with me on that. Let's move on, though. Varys and Littlefinger, the system versus the fire. If you want to talk about how societies run, Varys and Littlefinger are sort of your tour guides. The chemistry between the two actors in the show, by the way, is storied. It's fantastic. These guys perfectly encapsulate these beautiful roles. And in the books, they also have a really awesome dichotomy. They're a dyad of chaos and order, and they are behind the scenes. Both of them are behind the scenes working their will. And it's this beautiful. They're sort of almost like beautiful plot devices more so than characters, but they also are complex and nuanced human beings in their own rights. So it's beautiful writing. These are power players that are working their will behind the scenes. All right. While everyone else is waving banners and blowing horns and saying, I'm going to sit on the Iron Throne, Varys and Littlefinger are behind the throne, working their way. Littlefinger wants to put his own butt on the throne eventually, but he comes from a lower house. He's not very well respected. He's known as a sneak, and he runs brothels. He's just not he's like a pimp. He's just like not the best guy. But he's behind a lot of the events of the story. And Varys is sort of the same way, except for the opposite side of the coin, right? Varys believes in the system. He believes in the realm. He talks about that all the time. He believes in keeping things functioning, no matter the moral compromise. Varys, he's the spy master. He's the spider in the center of this complicated and intricate web. He works his will on the kingdom little by little in the shadows, always putting his thumb on the scale of the people. And he fights chaos and he works for peace, even if he's willing to use filthy and underhanded methods to get what he believes best for the people. Littlefinger, on the other hand, he believes in the opposite. His big quote is, chaos isn't a pit, chaos is a ladder. Right? I mean, chaos is an opportunity for him, and so he's making chaos wherever he can. These two, they're playing totally different games. Varys is playing defense to try and keep things from collapsing. Littlefinger, he wants to burn the board and crown himself king of the ashes, right? He's willing to use any means necessary to cause chaos and make hay in the spaces that open up while everyone else is at each other's throats. It's really, really fantastic writing. Together, they ask the question, is power about control or chaos, vision or appetite? And what happens when both start to win? There are many other great characters that we could talk about. In fact, I can think of a dozen of them right off the top of my head. That's what makes this saga so epic. We could be here all day, but I'm gonna start to kind of head towards the end of the story here. Those are just a few of my favorite characters, but every single character, they're beautiful. They're deeply flawed human beings with totally believable and oftentimes deplorable sets of wants, desires, appetites, ambitions, fears, virtues, and faults. They're complex to a breathtaking degree, and they represent the true strength of the series. So, the larger point. Here's what you start to realize as you read these books. Martin doesn't build his characters around what they are, like a knight, a queen, a thief, a dwarf, and a cutthroat. He builds them around what they believe, and then he makes them prove it. He puts them into tough situations, and that's why their choices feel so meaningful. That's why readers argue about them like they're real people, because every action in this series has a philosophical root, and it makes you turn inward. You start to ask yourself, would I choose love over duty? Would I betray one person to save 10? Would I keep fighting, even if I knew I'd never win? And that's the trick. These aren't just characters, they're mirrors. And unless you're just the worst person who ever lived, they're probably going to be more like a funhouse mirror, right? That sends a warped reflection back at you, right? Like you're probably not actually as bad as these people are. But just like when you're reading Lord of the Rings, it makes you see yourself in the great and noble deeds of the iconic heroes there. You're sort of, those are sort of aspirational. You kind of see like, gosh, I could be like Aragorn. I could do the right thing, even if it costs me, I could be like Frodo. I could be, I could have the world stacked against me and I could still put one foot in front of the other, right? I could be that guy. Just like that, the Lord of the Rings kind of creates that aspirational thing. A Song of Ice and Fire makes you see yourself, your own self, in like the underhanded, small, petty deeds of desperate and grasping people. It's sort of like the inverse. It's a dark mirror. Like, gosh, maybe I am the Frodo who puts the one foot in front of the other, but maybe sometimes I'm also the Littlefinger who is willing to, maybe not shove someone down the stairs, but if they stumble, I'm not gonna stop them from falling, right? Kind of a thing. There's some cynicism there, and gosh, it's really tough. It's really tough. The mirror that this story shines back at you, and you think to yourself that if I were them in their situation, I might do that. The feeling of knowing that I would do the same thing in their situation, and knowing also that they're a bad person, that's very unnerving at times. And I do think it takes a little bit of moral sophistication to read these stories and get out of them what you need to. there's sort of a philosophy of the world of Game of Thrones. It's a commentary on power, history, storytelling, memory, the seductive pull of fantasy itself, right? And Martin, he seems gratuitous at times with the suffering and the violence. And so why does he enjoy suffering so much? I mean, he would say that he doesn't, but he sort of also insists that suffering kind of tells the truth, right? And we'll dive into those ideas. So, what does it all mean, right? That's the question that you should ask, sort of as a recap. A Song of Ice and Fire, it isn't just epic fantasy. As I said, it's a cold black mirror. And George R.R. Martin, he isn't just telling a story; he's sort of telling on us, on humanity. It's sort of a criticism of human nature, on history, on the very idea of fantasy itself. And he does this with this one sort of unrelenting thesis that winter is coming. And it's not just a slogan; it's a worldview, right? That you know things. Even if things aren't good now, they could always be worse. Or if things are good right now, they're not going to be good for long. It's sort of this idea that this sort of entropy focused, the world is heading to worse times, worse days are ahead. It's a very pessimistic outlook, and it's through that lens that this story is told, where these people are trying to position themselves so that they can be on top, and their family and their themselves really, and the things that they love can be preserved in a world that is failing in a lot of ways. So Martin, he's not writing traditional fantasy, right? Not really, right? He's kind of subverting it. Of course, this still has the swords, shields, knights, maidens, dragons, magic, wizards, assassins, kings, queens, lords, ladies, and all that traditional epic fantasy story trappings. Its setting is distinctly medieval fantasy fiction, yet the story told is anything but traditional. There's no clear chosen one, for example. There's no guaranteed happy endings. In fact, you find yourself rooting for characters that, boom, they're dead. They're just gone. They're out of the story. They're pulled from the roster, and you didn't see it coming. And it's crazy how that happens. It's like the rug is pulled out from underneath you, and that feels almost more real than real, right? And that happened in real life, right? Like a king was captured on the battlefield, boom, his head is chopped off. That's it. He's out of the Game of Thrones. There are no invincible heroes. And when you pick up a sword, you might win honor, or you might lose your hand. Martin has said it best himself. In real life, the hardest aspect of the battle between good and evil is determining which is which. So what does that do to us, the readers? It sort of forces a weird sort of, I don't know, maybe like you could call it like a moral humility, forces us to sit in uncertainty, which is exactly what Martin believes real life is like. Now, I personally don't share that worldview. I believe that right is right and wrong is wrong. I believe that there are things that are inherently good and things that are inherently evil. I believe that there are some things that are simply true, and not just like your truth, my truth, or anyone else's truth, just the truth. I think pretense of moral ambiguity is what a lot of people use to justify hideous behavior toward their fellow man. And then, I mean, yeah, they'll justify it by saying, well, what even is the truth, man? Or who's to say what's right and wrong? And in my experience, whenever you find someone who's making a case for being open to like the quote unquote gray areas of life, that person is not really trustworthy. You know, they're up to something. They're hiding something. They're angling for something. And I honestly, personally, I have a lot more respect for someone who has the courage to admit that they know right from wrong, yet they're just choosing to do wrong because they know it affords them certain advantages in certain situations. Like, just admit it, bro. Just own it, right? Like, if you're like, yep, you know that you shouldn't do that, but you're going to do it anyway because it gains you an advantage, and you have weighed the cost of, you know, doing that, and you say, yeah, it's worth it to me. It's worth it to me to do a thing that I know is wrong because it gives me an advantage. I have a ton more respect for a person who's willing to be honest about that, rather than try and do all the mental gymnastics to make it seem like, well, no, actually it's right, and I'm righteous, and everyone else is wrong, and society is wrong, and the patriarchy, and you know, the women are wrong, and men are wrong, and you know, different people in power are wrong, and I'm really just I'm the only righteous guy, the last righteous gal, the, you know, me, and it's just I find it really gross, right? Like, it's you know. Just give me a cold, hard, cynical realist any day over someone who's going to moralize and puff out their chest. That's all I'm saying. If I'm going to have a knife slipped in my ribs, I'd rather that, you know, its wielder is just sort of shrugs at me and tells me I was in their way. And then that's like, I'm like, okay, well, yeah, fair, man. Like that sucks for me, but I guess, you know, them's the breaks. Right? Rather that than someone who goes on like a long-winded rant about how the stars and the moon and the ancestors aligned in such a way as to make me somehow deserving of a knife in the ribs, and that they are merely the deliverers of all that is true and righteous and virtuous in the world. You know, that's even if the end result is the same, I've got a knife in my ribs, I'd just as soon do without the sermon, to be honest. But that's to me personally, right? I don't like to live in a world of moral ambiguity when so much of what's right and what's wrong is manifest. Because if something inflicts a cost upon the innocent, then it's wrong. I think that if something inflicts a cost upon the innocent to the gain of the guilty, then that's an inherently wrong thing. I will admit that there are some things that are not always cut and dry. There are some things that are complicated, but for the most part, like if you're doing something that inflicts cost, that debases, that brings dishonor, that makes you less than you should be, that hurts other people, those things are just wrong. And you can sugarcoat it all you want. You can try and say, well, society only says this is wrong because they're threatened by it, or like whatever, man. Like just give me a break. I'm obviously getting too old for that. Back in my days, as a TA in the sociology department, I would have gone, blow for blow with these young kids and their critical theories and all that stuff. But I'm just too tired of it, right? Like just do the right thing. Stop pretending like you don't know what it is so that you can do whatever you want. It's exhausting. So I'm not positive, by the way, that that's George R.R. Martin's personal view. But judging by his writing, he seems to believe that the truth really depends on your perspective, and right and wrong depends largely on who is able to win and then write the history after the fact. It's a very cynical worldview, but it's one that's, it's easy to understand. Like I said, the people with double-digit IQs who write entry-level freshman papers on critical theories, they understand easily enough that they can make an argument that just because someone else did something bad, this person now is entitled to do something bad as well, or to be let off the hook for something bad that they did. Or, there's a moral ambiguity in place because of this or that extenuating circumstance. It's fine. It's fine as far as it goes. I do understand that, there's some complexity in the world. I'm not trying to reduce it to just, yes or no, or 1 and 2. It's just takes a little bit more, I think, moral courage to say, no, that's just wrong. And that's just right. And I'm going to do what's right. And I'm not going to do what's wrong. And, I'm going to leave other people to make their own decisions. But I'm not afraid to say either that I think that's wrong. So Game of Thrones just isn't that way. It's he feels like he's not, entertaining you with comforting illusions. He wants to make you squirm and think and reflect. And it's a fantasy world where sort of the usual escapism is kind of replaced by a severe sort of cynical realism. And that realism, as portrayed, is often brutal. There's not as much of the good and the beautiful in this story as there would be in real life, because I think one place where he fails as a storyteller is in portraying the truly good and virtuous people. Right. It seems like all of his virtuous and good characters are either rubes and chumps who end up dead, or they're secretly hiding something. There's something sinister. Right. And that's so tired. That's so exhausting. Hollywood is just beating that to death, where oh, yeah, there's a story where there's a preacher, and he can't just be like a good guy who's trying to follow God and help his community. He's always going to have some secret, sinister, past, or he's got skeletons in his closet and he's trying to hide it. And it's just tired. Some people are just good, and it's okay. And that's something that I feel like is really missing from the Game of Thrones books, from A Song of Ice and Fire. It's just where are all the good people? Where are the good women who would gather together and make sure that their families were taken care of, and they would do clothing drives and food drives, and they would try to hold their community together? Where are the good men who would rally around to protect their communities and their families, and to post a guard on the walls and try to create a cohesive working society? I just don't understand why it's so brutal and nasty and mean the whole time. But that's just, I'm nitpicking here a little bit. And that comes down to, it's sort of his strategy, right? It's sort of, he would say that history it's not just flavor, it's propaganda, it's power. That's why characters are always arguing about the past. Who ruled, who betrayed, what was fair, what was just. History is this subjective thing because, as Martin seems to believe, it's subjective in our world too. Right. And, a character without history is vulnerable. It's sort of like he writes history as a living thing. It's distorted by the bards, the maesters, the kings. They're all telling their own versions for their own purposes. I think that it does have parallels in today's day where you see powerful forces sort of spinning their own versions of history, and they're selected and slightly bent or maybe even entirely fabricated facts to try and compel scared people to believe them, or make people scared, make people angry, make people feel certain things based off of not entirely the truth, because you want to control how they're reacting. And it's a cynical way to live. It's a cynical way to be. That's one of the big bad realities that you end up facing as you read through A Song of Ice and Fire. You soon realize that there's this. I mean, if you wanted to, you could look around and say, wow, there's a real world Game of Thrones playing out around me everywhere I go. These characters are so real and believable. They represent ideas, actions, and attitudes that are very familiar to us. And so they're, but at the same time, if you walk around feeling like there's a Game of Thrones going on in the shadows all around you, that is not a good way for you to love your fellow man, right? If you're thinking that everyone else is ladder climbing and grasping, then that's going to encourage you to do the same thing. And then you're going to actually be doing that. And your actions are going to encourage other people to be, given to their basest instincts. And so, good begets good and bad begets bad. And that's one of those things that, you kind of learn as a kid, but then you sort of forget as an adult when you're like, no, it's complicated, man. It's really complicated. There's a lot more going on here. And there isn't a lot at the end of the day. I'm sort of kind of rambling now around the point that I'm trying to make, but there just isn't a lot to recommend these books morally. Right? There aren't really characters for you to look up to throughout the stories. I wouldn't recommend these books for children, like I said, or for those with maybe a childlike view of the world, right? These books, I think, could be harmful to a person with Machiavellian tendencies and who lacks the intelligence to understand that if you try and do this, you're going to end up in jail or you're going to end up completely friendless. No one will trust you, right? Like you're not smart enough to pull off, like the 4D chess plan that ends up with you as, the emperor of the known world and everyone loves and adores you. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to try and manipulate people. You're not going to have access to anyone except for the people who love you. You're going to try and manipulate them. You're going to hurt them. You're going to distance yourself from them. And then you're going to be alone in the world. That's what's actually going to happen here, right? So if you lack the moral sophistication to understand that you should not emulate any of these characters, you really shouldn't be reading these books. People who are going to be enriched by books like this, they're the ones who are going to gape and ooh and ah and keep reading, right? You'll keep reading, you'll refuse to look away, and then you'll close the books at the end of the day and you'll kind of say to yourself, ew, right? Yuck. And in so many ways, the stories are sort of a cautionary tale about people at their very worst. It's not even like they're anti-heroes, like doing the wrong things for the right reasons or whatever. They're just fighting dirty for power, plain and simple. The people who aren't able to play the game die early, and only the most crafty, cunning, ruthless, and powerful are able to last throughout the story. And all the while, the innocents of Westeros are ground to a pulp by armies, dragons, frozen zombies, disease, famine, roving hordes of wild men, and each other. It's just a textbook execution of man's fall from grace and into something beastly and brutal, right? The Hobbesian, nasty, brutish, and short lives of people who are living in a society where the trust has broken down and the moral compass of everyone is now spinning around wildly. That's what it means. That's why we need moral systems. That's why we need a shared set of values where we can say truth is truth, right is right, wrong is wrong. If you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. And we're going to reward good behavior and punish bad behavior. A society needs that in order to function, because if everyone is just living their own truth and justifying their own actions, that all that is chaos. All that is the world of Game of Thrones. It's murder, it's simple power, it's dirty, it's crafty, it's cunning, it's ruthless, and it's no way to live, right? So if you can take the Game of Thrones world as a sort of a cautionary tale about how to not be, then that's, I think, the best way that you could get something out of these books. And you can keep these books are great. They're great. And I'm saying a lot negative about them because I want to be careful that I don't fully endorse something that I think is in a lot of ways hideous. But at the same time, it is a high form of art. It does hold up an interesting mirror. It does make you think. And if you're willing to really grapple with these ideas and engage with them, you're not only going to have a really good time because it's extremely entertaining. It's entertaining in all of the ways it's possibly entertained. Like there's sweeping vistas, glorious views, excellent dialogue, gripping fight scenes, intrigue, palace intrigue, farmyard intrigue, mercenaries, people without a banner, people flying, colors, kings, queens, lords, just armies crashing against each other, assassins in the night. It's the total package. It's excellent. It's exquisite. And you'll keep flipping the pages and because you're just desperate to find out what happens next. Unfortunately, though, you can't, because Big George hasn't finished writing them. And it's perhaps the main reason that I cannot in good conscience recommend these books to anyone anymore, is because everyone I know who has read and loved these books is living in a constant state of this sort of low-grade irritation every time they think of the story, because for reasons that are completely beyond belief, George R.R. Martin hasn't finished the series. It has been, like I said, 14 years, and there's still no sign that the book is going to be coming out anytime soon. And when you have the body type of a guy like Big George, you've got to be asking yourself whether his heart is going to be able to hold out long enough for him to finish the series. So if you don't like leaving things unfinished, then don't even start the series. Fair warning to you. So maybe that's it. If you have a difficulty with moral ambiguity, if you don't like violence and swearing and sex, which, it's hard to recommend them. If you're sensitive to those sorts of things, stay away from this book. And even if you do like all of those things and you're willing to, engage with the moral ambiguities and really come out on top and feel like you can handle that, you might not even want to read these books because they're not finished yet. So there we are. At the end of the world, or at least the end of the series so far. We've wandered the kingdoms, we've met the heroes, the villains, and everyone in between, and you're left feeling kind of probably unsettled. And that's good, because A Song of Ice and Fire isn't here to give you the answers. It's here to ask hard questions about power, about death, about how to live while the snows are falling and the fires are dying. So stay warm out there, stay sharp, and remember, a reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies, but the man who never reads lives only one. And that'll do it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, if you want to reach out to me, you can email me at whatstomreading@gmail.com. I will get back to you. Again, I have a perfect response rate on there, and I intend to keep up for as long as I can. If you'd like to support my own books, you can find them on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever good books are sold. And a little announcement on that front real quick. I have taken my book, Nightquire, off of the shelves for a little bit of a rewrite. It was my first book, and I attempted a few things that I have since learned didn't really land. I kind of lacked the skill a little bit to execute on those. One of the beautiful things about running my own publishing label is that I can immediately and without question pull a book from production. I can alter it, and then I can return it to the shelf again. Of course, that's something I will only do in the direst of need. I don't want to be changing things willy-nilly. But in this case, and for those of you who have already bought Nightquire, by the way, let me know, and I will get you a totally free ebook of the rewrite once it's out. Just send me an email again. But a part of me, I was conflicted about this because a part of me wants to let the book sort of stand as a testament to my progress as a writer. Like, I know that I can do better on all of my books. And so I just was sort of being like, just leave it and don't go back to it and just kind of move forward and let your newest books be your best books kind of. But Nightquire has this fatal flaw in it. Essentially, I tried to be a little bit too clever by making a villainous protagonist be the viewpoint character. And most people seem to understand what I was driving at, but for a sizable minority of my readers, they felt that I had, in my clumsiness, glorified actions that I find morally reprehensible. And if it were just a couple of people who were missing the point, I'd leave it at that. But it seems like about a quarter of my readers thought my protagonist was supposed to be a good guy and ended up feeling hurt and betrayed that I would glorify his heinous actions through his perspective. So that speaks more about my developing skill as an author than it does about my intentions. So long story short, I'm pulling the book off the shelf for now. I'm going to make some rewrites and I'm going to re-release it again at a later date. I don't know when specifically that will happen because it's going to the back of my production queue. And on that note, I should be finishing up the outline for another thriller novel tonight. So expecting an announcement on that front soon. If you want to check out any of my existing work, I strongly recommend Human Cure. A sizzle reel of that book will play directly after this podcast episode ends, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening, guys. I appreciate you and your support. Remember to review the show on iTunes or wherever you're listening and to share it with a friend who you think would get a kick out of it. Take care and have a good day. You deserve it.